You're listening to Consulting Logistics, presented by Freight Plus. I'm your host, Comic Knot. Thanks for checking us out. Today's another SCU30 episode. These are our fun kind of talking to supply chain professionals under the age of 30, really to shed a light of how they got into the supply chain. It's one of those interesting industries where it's a lot of old guards and people are trying to grow it up and get some young blood into it. And today's guest, I'm excited to talk to because he's one that you probably actually have already seen because on today's show, I have Andrew Cox, senior retail and market analyst and grad at University of Tennessee at Chattanooga of FreightWaves. So a really fun conversation. At University of Tennessee at Chattanooga, Andrew studied economics and entrepreneurship. He started as an intern at FreightWaves, so I'm really excited to talk about that in October of 2018, and then joined them full-time upon graduating. He leads the retail community where he pens a twice-a-week retail supply chain newsletter, The Point of Sale. It actually hosts a show by the same name. He also hosts the FreightWaves or the Freight Finance podcast, Great Quarter Guys, on every Tuesday at 2 p.m. Eastern Time. And then he also does twice a week on FreightWaves, just market updates and talks a lot about the retail. And he's a big part of the virtual events. So someone who's really out there talking and young, which is so much fun to talk to. So Andrew, how's things going, my man?
Kyle, thanks for having me. Things are going well. Always busy at FreightWaves, but trying to keep up. It's hard to. We're always changing and trying to push the envelope, but it's fun.
Oh yeah, you guys are definitely changing, going fast. I mean, 2020, you guys put the foot down on the gas pedal and went. But I mean, at the same time, we're seeing both of us are working remotely, kind of get to relax, you have a dope shirt. Sorry, didn't mean to curse at all. Love the old school Outcast and everything. But yeah, let's jump into it, Andrew. I mean, usually we kind of start off this show with where you kind of grew up, what were you interested in, like high school and stuff like that, and kind of what were your passions growing up. So let me know.
So I was born in Nashville. I was not an only child, but it was seemingly an only child because I have brother and sister that are so much older than me. So I got a brother that's 15 years older than me and a sister that's 18 years older than me. So I was born very late in my parents' life. So I had almost two sets of parents growing up, which was nice, a younger set and an older set. Growing up, I played a lot of sports. My dad is a baseball fanatic. We grew up big Vanderbilt fans in Nashville. So I've gone through the plight of a Commodore fan. It's not easy, but it is rewarding when it comes.
First female kicker. There you go. You got to cheer for something.
Yeah, that was a marketing ploy. But in any case, I was always naturally curious as a kid. I always was very interested. I wasn't naturally curious in like the tinkering way that like engineers typically are. Like I didn't get a computer and want to take it apart, but I was always curious and searching and finding new information on it. And I remember so distinctly, and I don't know, you have these things happen to you as a child and you don't know what kind of seeds they plant until later on. But I remember so distinctly looking at a Nerf football when I was probably 7 or 8 years old, and I saw the word China on it. And I was so captivated by the fact that this little ball that I play with on a daily basis, my favorite toy, was made so far away on the other side of the planet. And I think, that's like a seed that might have been sown early on, just the idea of our goods coming from different places and us, basically everything we buy comes from a different country. I think I always had an interest in that. I was naturally curious about the world. I was obsessed with Google Maps as a kid. I remember having to download the whole program. It wasn't even a web browser when I first started playing it. I remember the Google icon in the corner. That was my fun time that I would go and play on the internet. I would go to Google Maps. So I was always naturally curious about the world. I think that led me to want to study abroad when I was in college and want to travel as much as I've gotten the pleasure to do so. So I've always been naturally curious and I've had a passion for understanding how different systems work between the different countries around the world.
Yeah, no, it's interesting. I mean, it's sort of that you're right. Like I like you learn a lot about a little, like you know a little bit about a lot of things, right? You kind of studying about all that, staying curious. What about schooling? Like, how were you? Were you like a math guy, a science guy? I'm if I had to guess, history guy. Were you kind of big into like that type of stuff?
I definitely would consider myself a history buff. I'm not as much as my mother or my brother. I loved math. My dad is a math guy. So I loved math growing up, but it wasn't always it wasn't my strongest suit. I just enjoyed it. And when I got to college, I wanted to kind of blend, and I thought economics was the best way to blend math and logical thinking, because I've always felt that I had an edge when it came to just analytical thinking and trying to process ideas. I was just able to understand difficult things usually. And so economics was a good blend for me. I was able to use the skills I had in math, and economics is basically just logical thinking with big words. That's all it is. And I think it built me a way of thinking, a way of processing things that I've used every day at FreightWaves, and I assume I'll use for the rest of my life.
I love it. Honestly, man, I wish if I could go back, I would have probably done your major. So let's talk a little bit about kind of college and stuff. You graduated, you headed to the University of Tennessee at Chattanooga. So you're already kind of going from like Nashville, which is a really fun city, but to this very interesting, I mean, especially the more I keep learning about Chattanooga and like fastest Wi-Fi speeds, all this kind of like tech hub stuff. Talk to me a little bit about kind of what drove your decision to go to that school and kind of what your major was.
Well, I had to stay in state. I just, from a monetary standpoint, I needed to get the in-state tuition, get the Hope Scholarship here in Tennessee. So I knew I wanted to stay in state. And as a diehard Vanderbilt fan growing up, Knoxville was never an option. I never wanted to find myself there. So I kind of had to decide where I wanted to live. That's kind of what I've made my decision upon. I knew all the schools in Tennessee were roughly equivalent, whether I would have gone to Memphis or Tennessee Tech or Austin Peay or Tennessee Chattanooga. They were all relatively similar schools academically. So I basically made my decision on where I wanted to live for the next 4 to 5 years. And that was a very easy decision. And I love Memphis. I'm not bashing on Memphis at all, or Cookeville or Clarksville, where Austin Peay is. It's just, when you compare the cities, Chattanooga is far and away better than all of those. You get, as you said, you have this entrepreneurial hub, this tech hub developing with the EPB and Google Fiber partnership that went a couple years ago. You have the city really focusing on entrepreneurship and have all of these programs for people to start companies, to build companies here in Chattanooga. And I saw Chattanooga as an opportunity with great outdoors. I thought there was a good place for me if I wanted to go take a hike. I saw this funny thing on Twitter the other day that said, I get people are skeptical of outdoorsy cities. He's like, there should be enough to do where you don't want to go hike every weekend. But it's the fact that the option is there for you at Chattanooga. There's plenty to do other than hiking. But if you want to hike, you can go and get some of the best outdoors in the country here in Chattanooga.
Yeah, whoever's saying that clearly just is like trying to like justify how much money they pay for freaking rent. Because like everyone that I knew that lived in New York City wanted to get the hell out of there on the weekends and be in nature. Like who the hell wants to be in like the city the whole time?
Yeah, you want a good mix. And I think Chattanooga provides a good mix. And so in college, when I got to UTC, I don't know what it was for me. I think it was just the idea of me paying for it myself. I was very lucky. I went to private school my entire life growing up. So I tried hard in school, but I was always naturally, pretty good in school. I didn't have to put in like the extra effort to get B's and A's. So I never did. But then when I got to college, I don't know what it was. It was a flip in my mind. It was like on day one, I already knew that I was going to put in more effort, that I'm a very competitive person naturally. And I said, this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to work my ass off for the next 4 or 5 years. And I'm going to do everything that I possibly can in college, get all the experiences that I can, and just work really hard. And I did. And I loaded myself with way too much at one point. And we could talk about some of the things. I mean, I was in just a bunch of clubs, econ club, entrepreneurship club. My most important club that I was in is something called the Smile Fund. I got to give them a shout out. I love the Smile Fund. So it's the Student Managed Investment Learning Experience. And there's a few of these cropping up around the country, but UTC has one of the best ones in the country. And it's a student-led investment fund. So they give us, we started with $250,000 of the school's endowment. They gave it to us to invest in equities. So we have this whole program that we have built out. It's a very structured thing, from a president to VPs to analysts, junior analysts. It's very structured, and they do very well. They beat the market each of the last 4 or 5 years. And they actually increased it there from 250. They gave them an additional $250,000 of the endowment my senior year. So now they've gotten $500,000, and they invest that money as any fund would. They come up with, the junior analysts come up with ideas. The analysts write reports with them. They bring it up to the vice presidents and presidents. They decide whether it's a good idea or not. We have all these monthly or quarterly investment meetings with Chattanooga, people in the Chattanooga investing community. And that is where I think I really, I started to get an understanding of presenting in front of people, forming ideas and presentations. And I think all of that has really translated to my role at FreightWaves. Very quickly, I went from when I got hired on full time in May of 2019. Within 6 months, they were asking me to be on TV, to be presenting things. I think that's because I already had some practice doing it, and it just took me learning about the industry, getting to a point of acumen where I could actually do it. But that was a big benefit for me, was the Smile Fund, learning how to research companies and learning how to present those ideas in front of industry experts.
Learning on someone else's dime. I mean, that's the, if anything, if the young people are listening, I hate saying young people, man, I'm only 32, I'm saying young people.
You're young
if
too, mate.
the cool audience is listening to this, it is learn on someone else's dime. And I think that's a big thing we're going to talk about, but we'll kind of jump into that a little bit later. But I mean, really, you did it right, dude. You seized the opportunities. You learned when you took the opportunity to kind of get this practice, because that's all this is, man. It's all reps, right? Like people, like we talk, like you and I are more or less on-air talent, right? But like I would not consider myself on-air talent. I've just done enough reps where I'm comfortable talking to a camera and having my personality come out. I mean, you watch the first couple ones, I'm sitting there freezing up. I have no idea how to present. It just comes from time. And I think that's a huge thing that you really did a good job of. I mean, really, kudos to you doing it in college. I think I was working in a newspaper, and like I learned a lot of type of stuff. I was one of the few that was actually working out of all my friends, but like joining the clubs, doing all that stuff was huge. But let's jump into a little bit in college. Did you get, I mean, your economics, your entrepreneur, I'm assuming you got some experience with the supply chain. Kind of, what happened there? How did you start to learn a little bit more about like supply chain and logistics and stuff?
Yeah, it's funny. I tell this story, but it is true. When I was a junior, a lot of the kids I was graduating, or that I was working with in school, were graduating and going, and almost all of them were getting jobs at brokerages here in Chattanooga, because they're a dime a dozen. I mean, there's so many great brokerages in Chattanooga, and I was seeing their faces after 6 months. We'd go and get a beer and catch up, and I saw the work. A lot of them were getting paid very well. They were doing well, but they were working hard, and they weren't exactly loving what they were doing. So I just thought, and that was my idea of logistics at that point. Like I had such a closed, narrow perspective on what logistics jobs entailed. So I told myself then, I wanted two things when I graduated. I wanted to get out of Chattanooga, and I wanted to work in anything but freight and logistics. And then I probably 6 months later, this internship fell in my lap at FreightWaves. And then I quickly started to understand this industry and all of the preconceived notions that I had, that it was this old, stale, white guys industry. All of these things were uprooted pretty quickly, because while it is still majority old and white and male, it is changing rapidly. And it has changed a lot over the last 10 years. So I wasn't exposed to any type of really freight and logistics experience until I got the internship at FreightWaves. When I was in school, UTC has a pretty good supply chain management program. I didn't go that route. And I'm glad I didn't, because I've gotten a lot of that knowledge post school. So I learned a lot of different stuff in school. So I think I have a well-rounded knowledge now with my schooling and the experience I've had at FreightWaves. But yeah, it was my first experience getting exposed was here at FreightWaves.
That's fascinating. I mean, everyone else I've talked to really had like, hey, yeah, I kind of took a class in college. I thought I was going down this business track, learned about this, and I found it fascinating. I mean, you didn't even. So one thing I know you mentioned kind of early on was that you like to travel, and one of the cool things you're able to do at UT Chattanooga was go to Amsterdam for like a broad semester. You didn't even get any exposure there. Kind of, what were you doing in Amsterdam?
Well, I studied a lot of. I studied economics when I was in Amsterdam, so I did. It was the hardest semester of schooling I could ever imagine. So I had no idea what I was stepping into. So it was a very difficult process for me. I knew I wanted to study in Amsterdam, but UTC has no sister school programs there. So they basically could not help me at all. So I had to do all of this. I had to find this program I wanted to go to, apply to it myself with no help from the school. It was hell. I would have to wait up till 3, 4 in the morning to call the University of Amsterdam's 1 hour window for prospective international students to ask questions. So I was having to, it was a terrible time, but it was completely all worth it. When I got there, I've studied at the University of Amsterdam, which is it's their best public university they have in the country. It would be considered, I mean, maybe their Cal Berkeley or something, if you had to give a U.S. comparison. And I was just amazed at how far behind I was behind these kids because I was taking classes with, I was at that point a junior, and I was taking classes with first and second year students. And I realized how much different the American school system was, the American university system, especially than especially the Dutch one and European ones, is their programs are much shorter, they're much more intense, and they're much more focused. I know what they don't waste an entire year taking these prerequisites on history and on all this stuff that I do feel helped me, but I don't feel was exactly necessary to what I'm doing or what I was learning. And they just skip all that and they go straight for the math and the analytics and the data science. And it's like, holy crap, I was so far behind. While all of these kids were already caught up on the math, I was trying to, they were learning the theory. I was trying to catch up on the math before I could even get to the theory. So I took some very difficult courses. I took an international development course, which I loved. It was talking about developing countries and foreign aid, how it's very inefficient and there's other ways to go about it. And we talked about in that class some of the best things, the reasons why the developing countries have more children than developed countries and things like that. Just so many questions I was able to answer. It was an amazing course, but it was very hard. The best thing I got to do in Amsterdam was I got to travel a lot to different countries. I probably visited 8 or 10 countries while I was living there for 5 months. And I always tell people that when you travel, if you haven't traveled out of the country and been to Europe, you learn way more about America than you do other countries when you're over there. I mean, you get a perspective. You finally get to look at America through a different lens, and you learn that there's a lot of things that America's great for, but there's many things that our idea of America is not so great. That there are better ways to do things than the way we do it. But I think all of that rounded my worldview and got I didn't really see logistics over there. Oh, actually, I lied. There was one point there that I was amazed by, and that was the first time I walked into a Dutch grocery store. They have the best fruit and veg that you can imagine. By far, I mean, just so much better than the U.S. It's just fresher, more colorful, tastes better. It's amazing, cheaper. And I was amazed by how a country this small could produce so much fruit and veg, because they're the second largest exporter of fruit and veg in all of Europe behind, or the third largest behind France and the UK. And they only have, this much space. They are so efficient with their production of food and their use of land. If that land is not being lived on or worked on, or it's not a public park, it's pretty much being produced for food, and they produce a lot of food, and they're some of the best there. So I got an understanding of domestic food production and how this one little country can feed like a third of Europe with their fruit and veg, and that was amazing to me. And I got an understanding. And Rotterdam, the port, I never got a chance to go to Rotterdam, but flew over it a couple times. But no crazy supply chain experience when I was in Europe. Just a lot of good times, really.
Jeez, Louis, like you saying just your story made me feel exhausted. I can't believe that you went to Amsterdam. You're like, oh no, I haven't even tried anything just yet. Like I'm nowhere close. Oh man, I feel bad for myself. But I mean, you want to do the entrepreneur. It makes a ton of sense, right? You got to be driven. You got to be self-motivated to do all that type of stuff. Let's kind of take it back more stateside and discuss a little bit about the internships. We keep hinting at it, but FreightWaves wasn't your first one, and you really kind of did start using that stuff. Talk to me why you pursued internships so much. What was the kind of the driving factor? Was it just getting experience?
Yeah, it was getting paid, first of all, and then getting experience. Yeah, I mean, I was a broke college kid, and I've still served. I mean, I did the bartending and serving on the weekends throughout college. But I always wanted to get internships during the week. I always felt that there were connections to make, mostly. So the first one I had, it was paid for by the university. Actually, it was great. It was amazing. It was like a $20 an hour internship to work with a marketing company here in Chattanooga, an SEO marketing company. I knew nothing about marketing, and I really didn't even learn that much about marketing through the internship. But I made an amazing relationship with the CEO of the company, and he's helped me along the way get connections throughout my time in Chattanooga. And then the next one I had that was one of my most fun was this internship I had with the Public Works Department in Chattanooga. So I was an intern for the city, and throughout my process, they didn't really need an intern, and they didn't really have that much for me to do. So I just dove in it as I would normally. I just tried to learn as much as I could about the Public Works Department and then learn what it was about Chattanooga, how we compared to the rest of the country. So I found a bunch of data on recycling and quickly realized that Chattanooga the government pitches itself as this eco-friendly, tech-forward type of company. We've got the fastest internet in the country. We have all of these things, and we pitch ourselves as this green, outdoorsy city. But our recycling rate is I mean, it's just staggeringly bad. Like it's a third of the national average. So
Am I gonna have to cut this stuff? Like you
oh
throwing some
no. They
insight?
know. I wrote my thesis on this. I wrote my senior thesis on this, and I basically I pitched to them that we could implement technology on the trucks, and we could collect a lot more data and make the system more efficient and incentivize people to recycle and yada yada. I mean, I basically laid out this plan that the city could save millions of dollars over the next 5 years, and the city bureaucracy, they pretty much they gave me a meeting. I'll give them that. They gave me an hour meeting, and then that was pretty much it. But
was the internship program also canceled after you? They're like, nope, we need to make this thing scheduled. We can't let this crap happen again.
They shouldn't just give a curious kid nothing to do. They should have learned that if they wanted anything.
Clearly.
But no, that was very fun. And that senior thesis was actually what led me to the job at FreightWaves. So my thesis director was Dr. Philip Roundy, one of the best teachers in probably in the country, but at UTC certainly. And he was good friends with our former CFO. Our CFO reached out to him and said, hey, we need an intern. This was in September or October of 2018. And then Dr. Roundy came to me and was like, do you have an internship this fall? And I was like, no, actually mine just fell through. And he's like, well, I didn't even reach out to you about this 2 weeks ago because I thought you did have an internship, but you should go talk to these guys at FreightWaves. And I was like, FreightWaves, what a funny name. What is that? So I went and Googled it, and there had been a couple articles on Craig and what they were trying to do. At this point, they were really ramping up, trying to launch the futures market. So that's what I thought I was going to be working on. I wasn't at all. And so when they brought me in, I had one interview, and it went not so well, actually. I thought it felt very strange. I think they were looking for somebody that had, and you mentioned it earlier. I would consider myself, if there's any one negative about my knowledge, is that it's a mile wide and an inch deep. Like I know a lot of things, like I can have a conversation on a lot of things, but I'm very doubtful of like my technical skills in a certain vertical. Like I can do it whatever Excel project you want me to do. I can figure it out, but I'm not an Excel whiz by any means, or I'm not a data.
Right. Yeah.
So I didn't think it went that well, but they gave me the job anyway. And I'll consider my job as an intern more or less a grunt. I did a bunch of one-off projects that everybody else didn't have time for, but they were fun, and it helped me get an understanding of all of the different aspects of the business. Like I would do some projects for our events leader at the time. We're doing some analysis on what promotional strategies work to get more signups for the events, or we would do I do a lot of talking with founders and people trying to raise money for their freight tech startup. So I would have initial conversations with them to try to see if there was any way that we could work with them. So I learned a lot about FreightWaves, but I won't say I learned a lot about the freight industry, which I think was actually helpful for me. So I learned a lot about FreightWaves during my internship, and then when I came on full time, I still didn't know that much about freight logistics, and that period there, my first year at FreightWaves was just drinking from the fire faucet, or from the fire extinguisher, really.
Fire hose, yeah.
Fire hose, extinguisher, whatever. It was
we're
a lot.
Throwing too many damn sayings out there for
swimming.
This interview. Dude, my mind's running, man. I get exactly where you were. I sort of was the same, right? We talked about this before we even started recording, but like I had the same thing where it was just interested about a lot of things, but knew that not that much about it. Just kind of always had a little bit of knowledge about a lot of things. Fascinating. I mean, just the fact that you've done so many interviews that you're able to, even at that stage, be like, oh yeah, I don't think this interview went well. Like everyone at like the amount of kids fresh out of college are just like, I did a great job in this interview. And you're like, oh my God, you had no qualifications. You were nowhere close. The experience that you kind of set up really helped out. So what you got the full-time job and you kind of jumped on in. I mean, what drove you? Because I mean, one of the most fascinating things, at least for me too, was jumping into freight, was there really wasn't much in terms of education. Like I kind of joined in 2019, and that was really when FreightWaves started taking off a little bit. And you're right, you're working for the hub of educational content. Like how did you drink it from the fire hose, but how did that work? How were you kind of learning and going from there?
Well, I think once I learned, my good thing was that I learned so much about FreightWaves in my internship, and I had my aha moment pretty early on where I realized like this is a good business. Like there's nobody in this industry doing anything like it. They not only the Sonar platform, but especially the media side as well. So I understood it very quickly, and I also understood that I'm graduating soon, so I'm going to need a job after I graduate. And I just said, if I'm going to be in Chattanooga, I don't think there's anywhere else that will present me with the type of opportunities that FreightWaves will. So I said, I'm going to try to push for a full-time job. It didn't go so well at the beginning either. They told me that they didn't have the research department at this point. So this was March of 2019. We had no idea whether this research thing was going to be spun out. They hadn't really developed it yet. So they said, all right, Andrew, do you want to do sales? And I was like, not really. I'm just not, that's just not my forte. And they're like, well, you don't have the data science skills to be on the data science team. I was like, yeah, of course I don't. So I was just kind of stuck. I didn't want to do marketing. So I was just stuck where they didn't really have a place to put me, but they wanted to keep me. They just had no idea where to put me. And then, within the next couple of weeks, they contacted Kevin Hill, and Kevin Hill said, yeah, I'll come lead the research team. And then they were like, hey, this is going to be your boss. You're going to do these long form research reports. And I was like, that sounds awesome. I mean, that's what I've been doing in college for the last 3 or 4 years. I'm okay at it. I enjoy it. So let's do it. And that first 6 months, I didn't do much writing. I pretty much just got to work at 8 a.m. and I just read all day as much as I could. Watched everything. I digested everything that I possibly could about freight. We did a paper on autonomous vehicles, on truck parking, and then we started to do. We were doing these like one-off projects like that, and then we started to do more quarterly reports where we would do a quarterly carrier report and a quarterly shipper and broker report, and that's where I started to get the understanding of contract and spot markets and how this what seemingly is a very complex system works every day. And so I think it was just learning and listening, and there's so much. This was another thing that attracted me to FreightWaves. I'd be remiss to not mention this. It's just there's so much knowledge at FreightWaves in every industry. It's like, or in every segment of our company. It's like on the data science team, they've got PhDs and CFAs and quants that works for the military. And like, if you want to learn anything about data, they'll answer any of your questions. You want to learn anything about freight? I mean, we've got people that worked at carriers, people that worked at brokers, people that worked at shippers. I mean, there's just so many people to answer questions that anything you want to know is within one question.
And I don't want to put words in your mouth, but it also seems like you've got the experience. You understand how to go out there and get that information. A lot of I find a lot of times it's people they expect the information to come to them, where it doesn't work like that. Not in the real world. You got to go out there. You got to be eager. You got to have the energy and read. I mean, it's the same thing. It's just you got to read. You got to kind of stay up to date on what's happening, and it takes a lot of learning. I mean, freight is so complex. I mean, logistics is so much crazier than I thought it was going to be. Like I was working with data engineers and working with engineers coming up with life safety in buildings before I joined Freight Plus, and it was the same thing. I'm like, oh, I can join Freight. Like this shouldn't be that bad. I see trucks on the highway all the time. I figured this out. I got in here in the first week. I tell everyone who joins Freight Plus, I'm like, yeah, it's going to seem overwhelming, especially everyone that comes from outside of the industry. I'm like, it's overwhelming at first. I'm like, you get to start learning. I'm like, just read, listen, watch. But I mean, you weren't afraid. That's the big thing. It's also go out there and talk to people. Like that information lives in people's minds. You've got to be eager to go talk to people.
Yeah, you got to be curious. Like, and I think that there's steps that go towards it, right? Like asking the question is the last step. I try not to ask the question. Like I try to answer all of the dumb questions before I ask the one good question, right? Like, because everybody at FreightWaves is super busy. So you don't want to take up anybody's time or everybody in freight. Right? Like if people are busy, you don't want to ask dumb questions, and most of the dumb questions are answerable on your own. So do everything you can to answer all of the questions, get a decent understanding, and then you ask your question. That's been my format so far.
Oh yeah. I tell it anytime someone comes to me for video, I'm like, did you Google it? I'm like, if you didn't Google this question, why did you come to me?
Right.
Like, I shouldn't be your first answer.
I mean,
for anything.
They can answer like 99% of the questions.
Right. Most of the time, Google or YouTube is going to answer what you're looking for. Like,
Right.
You don't need my level of like knowledge on something. But yeah, I mean, it's so interesting. So let's start to wrap up a little bit. Talk about kind of what you're doing now. I mean, you jumped in. You got Kevin Hill coming in there. He's a great guy. Kevin's the one who actually introduced me to you and got you on the show. So let's talk about what you're doing now, and then let's start giving some advice. I mean, you clearly were a home run when FreightWaves brought you on as an intern. The fact that they're like, listen, we got to find something for you because we don't want to lose you is great. Let's talk a little bit about what you're doing now. And then, yeah, like I said, we'll go into some advice for up and coming kind of college kids, high school kids. What should they do? If they're interested in some stuff, what should they be trying to do?
Yeah. So after a year of being on the research team, being on Kevin's team, so it's Kevin, Seth, and I, Seth Holm, who joined us from a hedge fund. I've learned more from him than anybody. But after a year of writing those long form research, I had actually after about 6 months of writing the long form research, we started to beef up the FreightWaves TV offering. So they started to ask me to do, little 3-5 minute segments on either What the Truck or FreightWaves Now. And, that wet my beak for it. And then we kind of started Great Quarter Guys. And that wasn't my show to start. That was Seth's show to start. And then it kind of got passed to me after a couple months. And so, I did a lot of media. 2020 was the year for media. 2019 was my year of learning about the industry. And then 2020 was the year of media and just kind of flexing a little bit of that knowledge that I have to have conversations like we're having now. And then at the end of 2020, towards the end, I guess it was September. So Craig announced that we were going to be rolling out communities, which is our effort to kind of try to attack the shipper segment in a more targeted manner. So we had previously looked at shippers as kind of like this monolithic group that everybody that shipped goods is in this category. But we've realized that shippers don't consider themselves that way at all. Shippers don't think of themselves as shippers. They think of themselves as an apparel company or as a food company or as whatever segment they're in. So we've tried to be more targeted with this. So we've had a few of the communities roll out. We rolled out Point of Sale, which is our retail community, Transmission, which is the automotive community, and then the Stock Out, which is CPG. We've just added another one that will be coming out soon, and it's called Medically Necessary. It is a healthcare and pharmaceutical supply chain newsletter and community. So that's exciting. And so I started writing. They asked, who wants to take over these communities? I like, yep, right here. I'll take one of those. And I was like, I'd like the retail one if I could. So they were like, yeah, go for it. So they said, let's run with this. We're going to do, we're going to do newsletters, we're going to do podcasts. We're just going to run with it, but let's start with a newsletter, start writing it. So that was at the end of October. I wrote the first one and they started going out in November. So now my role has shifted away from writing so many long form research projects to writing more focused. So now my job is mostly the writing that I do is the newsletters. And then I also write the pricing power index on Fridays rather. And that's just this kind of weekly article that we talk about pricing power between shippers and carriers. And so, yeah, I mean, it's hard for me to remember all the tasks that I have these days because it's a lot. But so we've got Great Quarter Guys on Tuesdays, which is the Freight and Finance show. So on that show, we'll break down. We'll do the first half of the show. We usually do news type of ideas, talk about whatever's going on, and then we'll do a more in-depth discussion. So the last one we talked about drop and hook strategies. There's a bunch of different ones. So Great Quarter Guys on Tuesdays, and then the Point of Sale comes out Mondays and Thursdays, the newsletter. And then we've also got Point of Sale Show, which now airs Wednesdays at 1:30. So that's a weekly conversation. It's an interview style show that I bring on an expert guest and we break down a certain aspect or a segment of the retail supply chain. So the first one I did was Satish Jindal, who is the president and CEO of Ship Matrix. He's amazing. He's got 30 years of experience. We talked about parcels and returns. So go check that out as well. And virtual events, of course. Yes, I do lots of virtual events. We've got the Global Supply Chain Week coming up next week, which is going to be very exciting. Each day is a segmented focus. Tuesday is the retail day, so tune in there. There'll be a lot from me and my guests then. And advice, I guess we can pivot to advice. I would say, be curious, challenge yourself. Like if college is a time where the more you challenge yourself, the more you will be rewarded post college. I really believe that's true. Like, yes, GPA is important, and that some people look at it, but they much rather care about the experiences and the stories that you can tell to interviewers, right? So when they ask you a question, they don't want you to answer the question with yes or no. They want you to tell them a story about you proving that you can or cannot do whatever they're asking about. And you can only tell those stories if you practiced them or challenged yourself during college. So I would say challenge yourself and do everything. Do things that are not in your set of skills. I was in the Federal Reserve Club at UTC because I wanted to learn more about the Federal Reserve, not because I really care about it, but because it was just more knowledge that I could gain and things like that. So I would say be naturally curious, challenge yourself. Look for internships. I will give a shout out to a website called wayup.com. It is one of the best places to find internships, especially with startups and fast growing companies. I love WayUp. I've like half of my friends have found internships on WayUp. But yeah, look for internships and look for either things that you think you might want to do. I think internships are a good way to dip your toe in. Like for me, I thought I didn't want to be in freight and logistics, but as soon as I dipped my toe in it, I realized, wow, this is much different than I had perceived it to be, and I actually did want to be in it. So do things that you're skeptical of yourself liking, and you might actually find that you do like them more than you thought.
Yeah, no, I always told the interns, I was like, listen, the best part about this thing is you can learn what you actually hate to do. Like, learn what you hate to do so you don't get into a career of that. I'm like,
yeah, that's as important as learning what you want to do.
Right. I'm like, if I give you a task that you hate, mark that down. I'll tell you exactly what career path leads you to that task so you avoid that task. Like, don't be an editor if you hate editing.
Right.
Basically,
That's good advice.
Last thing I want to ask. So listening to the like you talk to the young people, what makes you excited to go to work working in the supply chain? What's so exciting about being in this industry?
It powers the country. Like, I mean, and COVID has been the best example of this. I think COVID was an amazing thing for the freight and logistics industry. It's not an amazing thing for the country or for the world by any means, but just for the notion of the importance of freight and logistics for in the average consumer's mind, I think 2020 changed that a lot. You know, going to the store every day and buying what you need to having it delivered to your front porch every day, sometimes even having a relationship with the person delivering it, everything has changed when it comes to the idea of freight and logistics from the consumer. So it powers the country. I mean, the country would not have been able to survive if it wasn't for the drivers going out and moving the goods every day, or the logistics providers working throughout the pandemic to make things happen. So know that you're in one of the most important industries and one of the biggest industries in the country. I mean, it's an $8 trillion a year industry, and it's growing. So you know, I think freight is a good place to be because there's so many things going on. There's so many variables happening right now that are going to lead to exponential growth and progression and advancement in this industry. It's a huge and growing industry. You have a digital revolution happening where still a lot of this industry happens with handshakes and Excel spreadsheets and phone calls and everything else that these people do. And then you've got all this technology coming in. Like, you have autonomous vehicles, you have drones, you have automation, you have warehouse automation. So many things happening that's pushing this industry forward that, like, you can't even keep up with it. Like, we're spinning out new brands to keep up with it. Modern Shipper just dropped 2 days ago at FreightWaves. It's going to be our gig economy focused fulfillment e-commerce brand because we can't even keep up. There's so much happening right now that it's just a great place to be. I don't know another industry that's going through the type of evolution and revolution as fast as this one is. Right now.
I love that people use the phone, or these people do. You're like, who the hell uses a freaking phone? Get off this thing. Don't call me. I'm like, what are we, doctor's appointment? Why are you calling me? Dude, like, honestly, like, you nailed it. You knocked it out of the park again. You've been killing it this whole time. But yeah, I mean, it's a fascinating industry. I like to, the way I think of it is like, you get that, like, the nonprofit passion, right? Because it drives the industry, like you said. But at the end of the day, the patient doesn't die on the table. So you're not like a doctor. You don't have that stress, but you're still doing something that really helps drive, and you're doing it in, like, a fun new way that there's so much opportunity to seize. I mean, listen, you jumped into the retail space. One day you're going to have to tell me why you would want to do that after experiencing what retail went through with COVID. I mean, the 10-year growth in e-commerce we saw last year alone is nuts. And you're like, yeah, give me this community. I got it. Andrew, man, I can't thank you enough. All those things you talked about, it's all online. What are the links? What's the ways that people can kind of go see? Because that's a cool thing. The virtual events they're on demand too. So, like, where can people kind of go see everything?
Right. So virtual events, you can go to live.freightwaves.com. You can see all the schedule for everything coming up. And I think you can get some links to all of the old events on there as well. And then if you want, our podcast that we come out with every week, Great Quarter Guys and Point of Sale, that's available anywhere you listen to podcasts, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, pretty much everywhere else. It's also available on video on demand on YouTube or on tv.freightwaves.com. That's where all of our video is housed. For my newsletter, Point of Sale, you can go sign up for it at freightwaves.com/POS. I would love for anybody to join me. Yeah. We had to make a play on it.
Yeah. And, you grabbed it, huh?
Of course. You got to just completely change it in people's minds. And so freightwaves.com/POS. Come join us there. We just hit our 1,000th subscriber yesterday. So that was a good benchmark, a good
Congrats.
Mark that we've been aiming for. So, we've got big plans for it this year. We're going to grow much faster throughout the end of the year. I try to get as much content as I possibly can. I think I'm going to add a third day at some point during the year. So it'll probably go Monday, Wednesday, Friday, or something like that. But yeah, it's a great newsletter. I put a lot of work into it, and I would love for anybody if you're interested in consumer or retail or the economy. I mean, I talk a lot about economic data in there. I try to tie it all back together to freight and to logistics. So if you want to look at the world and through the consumer through a retail and freight lens, I think it's a good place to do that.
And LinkedIn, probably the best place if someone wants to, like, hey, I got stuff to do. Like I'm a new high school kid, or I'm a kid about to go to college. Reach out to you on LinkedIn.
Yeah, reach out to me on LinkedIn. You can find me, Andrew Cox. If you just type in Andrew Cox FreightWaves, I'll come up. Or you can add me on Twitter. I'm pretty active on Twitter as well. Andrew Cox 40 is my handle.
I keep hearing that. I thought Twitter was dead. I thought it was just
news
guys that do
Twitter is revived, man. Twitter is alive and well. It just had and just from a stock perspective, it had its best quarter in like 8 years. It was up like 15% in the last couple of days.
Oh man, Andrew, man, I can't thank you enough for joining me. I'm sure you got way too much to do. I can't believe you gave me as much time as you did, dude. Get to work.
Anytime, man. It's Friday, so luckily Fridays are my slowest of the days. I front load my week so I can have Friday. I mean, I still have plenty to do. Don't worry.
Yeah, what's that like? So you got 14 hours of work instead of like the 20 that you normally have?
Yeah, I tweeted this yesterday that I'm really glad that I'm thankful that I inherited the hard work genes from my parents. Like, it's just, for a lot of people, working a 10-hour day is just completely draining and they can't do it. But I don't know what it is. Like, I got it from my mom. I can just work 10 hours and it just not that much for me. And I was blessed with that gene, and I'm very thankful for it.
Enjoy it now, man.
Yeah, I know it's not going to be there in 5 years.
You hit 32 and all of a sudden sitting in the wrong chair for the day kind of affects your life. So super excited about getting old. Oh, man. Andrew, thanks so much for joining me today.
Thank you, Kyle. I appreciate the time, man.
All right. See ya.
See you, buddy.
And that's our show. Do you know someone who could be an SCU30, or are you a supply chain professional under the age of 30? I want you on the show. Leave a comment in the comment section. I will be sure to get in touch with you. In the meantime, like and subscribe to our channel. Thanks for watching Consulting Logistics. I'm Kyle McNaught. Rock and roll.